welcome everybody and thank you for your attendance this afternoon. At the start of the meeting, of course, I have to do the housekeeping. So may I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet and recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or use the raise hand function. If a participant raises their hand via the function and is not subsequently invited to speak by the chair, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of the chair and/or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and/or to grab the attention of the chair or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chair of Democratic Officer know. Thank you all very much for bearing with the housekeeping. Before that, all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the... Don't know what happened there. Could you all hear me repeating myself? Right, before we start the meeting now, some very sad news, and that is that Amanda Phillips, Head of Resource Management and Safeguarding, has sadly passed away. She was a huge asset to social services in a high-ranking position and would be sorely missed. So please could we have a 1-minute silence? Thank you. One minute. Thank you, everybody. Please, Lance, pass on the committee's kindest regards and sympathy to the family, please. Thank you. Right, agenda item 1 on this meeting of Tuesday, the 7th of February 2023 at 5 p.m. Apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, apologies received via myself from Councillor Collins this evening.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of January 2023. Is everybody happy with these minutes? Would you like me to go through page by page?
Move the minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil.
If I may, Chair, can I just point out that during the Welsh translation process for these minutes, it was picked up that in paragraph 1 for the leisure management contract minute, the paragraph references, the digits were slightly wrong, so it should read paragraphs 1.1 and 1.2. It's a very minor error. It doesn't detract from the message of the paragraph, but I just wanted to highlight that for yourselves. So with the committee's permission, I would put in the minutes that the minutes are approved subject to the committee noting that error. Would that be okay for yourselves in terms of moving and seconding?
Yeah, first by me
Absolutely.
and seconded by Neil.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Before we move on to declarations of interest, as you've already mentioned, the leisure centres, I'd just like to say what a wonderful visit we had yesterday and what an eye-opening experience it was, as I hadn't attended for quite a long time, as to how the money that's been spent there has definitely improved all conditions for residents of the area. And please pass on our thanks to Leisure Services. So,
Jan,
yeah.
while you said that, it's probably an opportune minute for the committee to wish Dave Nellis well as well. He's now gone off quite long term due to health issues, and personally, I wish him well, and I think the committee will as well. So,
yeah.
probably
Thank you,
a good
Neil.
point to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. I'm sure they will be passed on. I did mention it because I wasn't sure if everybody knew what was happening with Dave. But thank you. It's a good point to make. So agenda item 3 is to receive declarations of interest, including whipping declarations. Do we have any? Susan Lloyd-Selby.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to make a declaration of interest, personal interest in relation to agenda item 4 and potential prejudicial interest in relation to agenda item 5. I've got multiple family members in receipt of telecare and one family member in receipt of a care package. I've got dispensation from standards to speak only on matters relating to telecare and care packages. So I'll remain in the meeting for agenda item 4 and I'll leave the meeting for agenda item 5.
Thank you. Right, thank you. Moving on to the references, agenda 4, 5 and 6. We have a slide PowerPoint presentation on 4, 5 and 6. But what will happen, we will pause as it's one continuous presentation after agenda item 4 for any added recommendations from the committee, or if you have any questions, any changes that we do feel and points that we will make, if any, will be passed on to corporate performance. So with that, there is nothing in the reports that I feel we didn't see at Christmas. So with that, Gemma, if you'd like to take us through, please. And thank you, Matt, for coming along as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just share the presentation. Apologies, I've just got the slideshow. Okay. So looking at the revenue budget for consultation first. So as you'll be aware, we came to committee in November prior to Christmas with our medium-term financial plan and budget strategy, and we were setting out a significant shortfall of around 28 million. Since then, we've had the provisional settlement from Welsh Government, and overall at a Wales level, there were some consequentials that were set out of that 227 million of the 644 million that was received by Wales was directed to local government. This meant that at North Wales level, there was an AEF increase, which is aggregate external finance. So that's the funding we received from Welsh Government for 23-24 of 7.9%. And the working assumption that we had when I previously reported to Scrutiny Committee was 3.5%. So a significant increase there. Across Wales, SSA had increased by 6.2%, and specifically for this committee, the social services standard spending assessment had increased by 6.7%. And this reflects, in part, the commitment by Welsh Government to ensure the payment of the real living wage to the care sector being factored into those calculations. So focusing now specifically on the Vale of Glamorgan, We had an increase that was slightly above the All Wales picture at 8.9%, which equates to 16.6 million, which is 10 million more than we were planning for. And the overall standard spending assessment increased by 6.4%, and then specifically for social services, that increased by 7%. Just to go through some of the detail of the Vale Glamorgan position, the proposals you have in front of you assume an increased funding of 20.888 million after allowing for an increase in council tax. So that's 7.66%. Some other changes since the report came before yourselves is some work has been carried out by the senior leadership team and the budget working group to assess the cost pressures and try to bring those down wherever possible. Other changes have been reflected as well. There has been some increase in pressures as well as part of that process. Pay and energy pressures still total 15 million of cost pressures, and as reported previously, there are significant pressures around residential and domiciliary care providers, and as you'll be familiar from the monitoring, we are continuing to experience an inability to commission care, requiring significant growth in the funding so we can address that issue, and we also need to continue to roll out that commitment to meet the real living wage. There are some other pressures across the council, notably around homelessness, continued growth in demand for special school places and for the additional pupils with additional learning needs within our schools, and then also within school transport. So this slide sets out the updated funding gap. So as you can see, we're allowing for, in 23-24, additional funding of 24.6 million. With some use of reserves to smooth out cost pressures where we feel that that's prudent, because those cost pressures are expected to step down or be addressed through investment. Pressures have come down to 30.67 million, so that's being reduced from the 38 million that we reported to you back in October, November time, and that leaves us with a gap of 6 million, which we're proposing to address through savings and efficiencies. Now, focusing in more specifically on the scrutiny specific areas, this slide sets out, and I've got one more slide as well, setting out the leisure cost pressures, the cost pressures that are included in the appendix. So this is where we're proposing to put additional funding into the Social Services Directorate as part of the budget proposals you had before you. So funding for within children's services, external placements, to build additional capacity in the business support section, funding for a social worker for unaccompanied asylum children, some additional funding around a social care officer, and to support around special guardianship and residential arrangements, and also a pressure around the contract price for children and young people support. In the resource management and safeguarding service, some additional funding around additional capacity to enable there to be a children's commissioning role and finance officer, which will enable the service to commission children's placements on the same footing that we currently use to commission adults placements. And then in the adult services sector, some additional funding for a pressure around hospital social work, and a pressure around provider fees, quality assurance and demographic pressures. And that's, as part of that pressure, addresses that real living wage commitment in terms of providing additional funding to support that, some of the other inflationary pressures that providers are experiencing, and then also some additional funding to address specific issues in domiciliary care and try and improve the offer to close that commissioning gap. So looking at a proposed additional funding of 9 million. Now, the current proposal includes a step in for some of that funding. So the expectation is that the impact of some of those changes might not be seen in the first year, and it might take some time before that commissioning gap is closed. And so rather than allocate the funding and potentially have an underspend within the Social Services Directorate, the proposal is to step that in. So delay £2 million of that funding until 24-25. And it's felt that that is a prudent approach because that will also be underwritten by social services reserves in 23-24. So if we're wrong and we see that that impact is felt in full in 23-24, then we would fund that on a one-off basis from reserves and then reflect the funding in full in the following year. Picking up the leisure service cost pressure, there is an allocation as part of the leisure contract associated with increased energy costs for leisure centres of 250,000. I don't know whether there's any questions on cost pressures or whether you're happy if I carry on with savings and then take questions at the end. I don't mind doing it either way.
Well, as we have a councillor that has to leave after one of them, I think it is prudent to stop at the end of the presentation on 4 to ask questions.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So in terms of savings proposals, as we set out in the October report, given the scale of the cost pressures and the expected funding gap, there was clearly be a need to identify savings, and we identified a number of headings as a framework to identify savings proposals across the council. So around things like demand management, generating income, service review, investor save, digital strategy. Now, some of those savings clearly have a longer lead time before those savings can be identified. So you'll see that the majority of the savings across the council are focused in the service review and generating income sections, although within the social services savings proposals, there is more of the kind of investor save nature as well. So just picking up on the next slide in terms of the savings proposals that's specific to this scrutiny area, we have some proposals to invest in the residential care offer, freeing up reducing the costs of that provision, but also placing that provision closer to the community, which will hopefully lead to better outcomes. There's a proposal to review the kind of asset base that's utilised by social services, bringing down the cost of the service, and then also some additional income, and that's being largely delivered in the current financial year. So it's felt that that would be achievable for 23-24. We do have some proposals around reserves. So we have carried out a review of reserves, and our reserves have built up in the past few years, partly due to some additional grant that we've been in receipt of. So the proposal was to have fewer reserves, because we currently have a lot of lines of reserves as a council, but make sure that there is a better alignment to the key risks of the council. So there's less historical allocation of reserves, and also a more formal approach in approving how directorates use those specific reserves to ensure that that's aligned with the corporate priorities of the council as well. You'll have been used to seeing the detail on the use of reserves in the monitoring, and we'll be building on that as we go forward. So some of the corporate reserves that have been identified are things around pay pressures, energy pressures. There's a corporate landlord proposal, funding for general investment, and the digital strategy as well. We were also proposing to use reserves, as I mentioned earlier, where we feel like pressures can be stepped down. So proposing to use reserves to smooth the impact of homelessness and also energy costs. And as I mentioned earlier, we'd also be proposing to use reserves to support that step-in approach for social services. So in terms of next steps, we're currently out to public consultation, and this forms part of the scrutiny consultation. We'll be looking to take final proposals to Cabinet on the 27th of February. I think the final settlement's on the 4th of March, not the 3rd of March, apologies for that. And then final proposals would be brought to Council on the 6th of March with a view to meeting that statutory deadline on the 11th of March for setting council tax. So that's the end of that first item. So happy to take any questions at that point.
Anybody got any recommendations or questions? No. No, okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 5. Sue, you're going to leave the meeting and come back in?
Sorry, if I may, I just wanted to comment on the previous agenda item. Is that all right, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I don't have a question. Thank you, Gemma. That was a really helpful summary of the budget proposals as they relate to the focus of this committee. And it's really just a comment that all of us as committee members at every meeting have heard about the enormous pressure that social services in particular are facing, both in terms of inflationary increases, pressure in the domiciliary care sector, which has struggled to recruit, and the subsequent impact on people who've been waiting for care packages, and also the enormous pressure that children's services are facing. And I commend this budget because despite the pressures that the council is facing, what we've just heard is a detailed proposal around investing in those vital areas of social services provision. And as a committee, I think, given the issues that have been brought before us this year, my recommendation would be that we welcome those proposals for investment into this vital area of service. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. The recommendation is just to note the report unless we have any other recommendations to put into it. But we can add that if you'd like us to. Okay, yeah. You're going to leave us now, Susan?
Yeah,
I think Neil wants to come in, so if I can hear this debate on this item.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'd certainly support Susan Lloyd-Selby's recommendation there to add that. She's quite right. This is and thank you, Gemma. It was a well presented report so far. We'll see what happens in the next couple, but it's understandable, it's clear, it's very well done, and yes, I mean, as Susan said, and as I think Janice has said before, the pressures within this directorate are clear, they are ongoing, they are increasing, and they're statutory, most of them. So we have no choice but to pay for these services, and we need to make them as good and as effective as we possibly can. And I too commend this first part of the report. Thank you.
Haven't been trying to get rid of you, honestly, Sue. I can see that a lot of hard work and commitment has gone into this report, and I thank the team for that. So if we could move on now, please.
No, Councillor Cope has a hand up as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wonder if this is a question, just reading the report, because obviously we've got to make savings, and I understand that. And the report suggests, it says actually in point 2 of the report, that the savings should not have any unintended impacts, which suggests to me that there will be some impacts of these savings. And I'm wondering, do we know what those impacts will be in real terms to citizens of the Vale? Because some services will be maybe lost or cut back.
Who would like to answer, Lance or Gemma?
Well, if I start, and then I'm happy for Lance to come in. So, I mean, I suppose if I'm answering that question specifically for this committee, I think largely the social services savings are around investing in provision, alternative provision models that should, the intention is, would have better outcomes. And Lance is far more qualified to comment on this, so hopefully he'll come in shortly. And then in terms of the deferred income saving, that's being achieved in the current framework of income collection within social services in 22-23. So that would be achievable based on the current delivery model. And I'll ask Lance to come in to talk a little bit more about the investment proposals around alternative models of service delivery.
Okay, thank you. I was, yeah, essentially we're looking to, committee will be aware of this or already, to bring online some provision, residential provision for children's. So that should hopefully come into effect in July. We think that would be money that we would have otherwise spent on far more expensive placements. So we're hoping that those two things will reconcile to make the saving that you see there. And the reason I'm sounding probably slightly, wording it in a fairly complicated way, is that we're not talking about necessarily moving a child from one placement to another at a lower cost, because that might not be the right thing for that child. So I suppose it will offset over a period of time, which is why the savings therefore are spread over 2 years as well.
Thank you.
Makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Lance. Councillor Christine Cave.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small question, really, and it probably has come to committee at some time. But I'm just interested to know, we're going to make a spend on an officer for children that are unaccompanied and seeking asylum. I just wondered how many of those children a year we see.
Good question, Lance.
Rachel will probably have the exact number,
Rachel?
or very close. I know we talked about it the other day, but
I think it's 13 from memory, but I can double check that. And it's not, it isn't Councillor Cave that we're kind of several years in. So that would just be in probably, working it out quickly, something like 9 months. And it's part of the Home Office mandatory scheme. So this authority, no other authority, has a choice but to take the allocated number of unaccompanied asylum seeking children, including where there's a question around age and then the age assessment process, etc., that those children become looked after and we require accommodation, and they get a care leaver status as well at the appropriate time. So for any local authority, it's quite a significant additional consideration on top of obviously meeting the needs of the children that we already do. I'm not making any observations about whether that's right or wrong. It's clearly right, isn't it, to seek to support unaccompanied asylum seeking children, but there is an impact. And I think it's important for this committee to understand that, and certainly in this context to consider the cost pressure that arises from that in relation to having a resource. It's a very specialist task. We're learning that very quickly. So there are lots of layers of things like very specialist legal advice, age assessments, whole things around translation and picking stories in terms of how children have made journeys here, therapeutic needs, accommodation needs. It's multi-layered, multifaceted. And our position in Children's Services is that we're not able to do that without an additional resource. So that's where the cost pressure comes from. I don't know if that helps.
Oh, yes, it really does. Thank you very much. I know we said earlier that one of the things that we're trying to do is generate income. And I just wondered, as we are learning so fast and we will have an officer, will this be an area where we will look to generate an income possibly by helping other councils?
In what way, Councillor? Because
if we have a resource that possibly could generate an income, i.e. an officer that's got those skills that you just spoke about, because they're very complex, aren't they? Those needs of those children are very complex. I just wondered if the number, because we don't really know what the number is, we know what the number has been. I just wondered if there was a surplus here. We could then offer those services, especially if we've upskilled really highly upskilled a member of staff, whether there would be room to outsource that valuable asset.
Yes, and I think my question probably came from when we're not expecting that will give us a surplus. We're expecting that will allow us to stand still, if you like. neighbouring Cardiff, Cardiff have a high number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and we have benefited from their assistance in earlier times in finding accommodation, in understanding processes, etc. So no local authorities, naturally do that for each other. But I'm not. There was an intention at one time that we would formalise arrangement with them where we would essentially buy that service from them. And what happened for Cardiff, and I think will happen for us, is that what you don't end up with is capacity to do that for somebody else.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else before we move on? Any other questions? No? Okay. Can we move on then? Gemma and...
Yes, of course, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I just check, Amy, will you let me know when I'm able to rejoin the meeting, please, once this next agenda item has been addressed?
Absolutely. If you wouldn't mind just keeping your Teams open and I'll call you back in.
Thank you.
Sorry. So fees and charges is the next item. So this is a consolidated fees and charges report that covers a plethora of fees and charges across the council. So neighbourhood services, resources, place, learning and skills, social services. The majority of the fees and charges in the report reflect an increase of between 5 and 11%, and they've been rounded at, as you'll know, at the time of setting the report, inflation was nearer the 11% than the 5% figure. As part of our budget strategy, I think we've been very clear that where we are delivering non-statutory services, that we need to be ensuring that we're trying to deliver them on a cost recovery basis as much as possible, apart from where there's a clear policy or intervention need not to do that. And there are some really clear links within this report to the budget report. So there are some income targets that have been included as part of savings proposals. So picking up some of the leisure proposals. So in terms of sporting related fees, I think the increases were deliberately kept at the kind of lower end of that inflationary target, around 5 to 5.5%. And it was felt that any increase above that would potentially impact the utilisation of those services in the context of the cost of living crisis. But it was felt that there still needs to be an increase in the fees due to the rising cost of maintenance of those facilities. And then in terms of Jenner Park, those charges have been proposed to be increased by 11%, but there has been some reduction around charges to schools for sports days. And I suppose reflection in that is that the charge for floodlighting has had to increase so significantly to reflect the large increases in electricity costs that the council are forecasting. In terms of social services fees and charges, these relate to two areas. So there's an uplift in day service fees, and that's estimated at 11% and set out in the appendix. And then in terms of telecare service, I mean, this is a new offer that's included in these proposals, and there'll be further information brought in terms of the proposal. So it involves 4 levels of service. So there's essential, bronze, silver and gold. And then there's a new proposal around the falls detector and a service in partnership with St John's Ambulance. And associated with those new proposals is the cost of the new service. And the intention is that works towards a full cost recovery aim. There are some delegations within the report. So there's a delegation to neighbourhood services to amend prices in year if required. And in terms of the telecare pricing strategy, that is set out in the report, but it is subject to further review, and therefore a delegation to the Director of Social Services being requested as part of the report. So in terms of the next steps with this report, the report will be taken around scrutiny committees for consultation, with comments being brought to Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, and then with a view to taking final proposals for fees and charges to Cabinet on the 27th of February. I'm happy to take any questions on that report.
Neil?
Councillor Neil Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, Gemma, a clear and well laid out report, and I thank you again for that. It's the whole team have obviously clearly worked hard on this, and it's sad that we have to put prices up, but it's gratifying to see that many of those prices are staying well lower than the increase in inflation that have been caused by various circumstances that we in this council have no control over, but we are subject to. And I just wanted to make that observation, and to, as I say, to thank you for the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I'm sure you're speaking for all of us. Councillor Marianne Kelp.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the report, Gemma. I have got two concerns about the rises, though. The first one is item 2.18, the cost of hygiene caddies is to be increased by 400%. This seems to me to be an enormous rise, which will affect the most vulnerable families. It does state that this rise is only to cover the cost to the Vale, but in conjunction with this, if we do move to a 3-weekly collection, then 3 caddies are likely to be needed, and that would cost each family £30. I'm really concerned about that rise, and I'm wondering what we can do to source a cheaper or a larger caddy so that families don't have to have the 3 caddies. There are storage issues as well, but I'll just confine that comment to the cost. Do you want me to give you my next concern, Chair, now?
Yep. Do you want to take? Is there anybody here that can answer that anyway?
Chair, I don't think that's a question for this scrutiny committee. It's not our. It's yes.
Yeah.
It's not our remit. That's environmental. E&R.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Councillor Culp, but yeah, you need to take that to the relevant scrutiny committee.
Right, which you're saying is?
Chair, apologies.
Yeah, go on, Gemma.
I believe the relevant scrutiny committee is environment and regeneration. That's due to be held on the 14th. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll do that. I mean, it seems to me that healthy living in general terms would encompass things like hygiene caddies, which affect people largely with young families, or we're talking human waste here. So it does come, I think it does, but I accept that. I'll take it to that committee. You may say the same thing about my second concern then, which is about the outdoor trading spaces. The license to trade is being increased between 66 and 100%.
Yeah. That there again, Councillor Cope, is not this committee.
Okay.
This is just social services at the moment, and leisure, healthy living and social care. Okay. I understand your confusion. I do appreciate where you're coming from. I really do.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Could I just make the point though that using outside spaces affects people's way of living, and there are public health implications. So that's why I thought I should mention it here.
I understand, and thank you for bringing it up.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Does anybody else have any more questions? No? Okay, can we ask Susan to come back in now? Wait for Susan.
Yes, Chair, can I just confirm that your committee are noting the report?
Yes, please, if we could note the reference of this report, note the references.
And could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second.
Thank you,
Councillor Ball. If you just give me one moment, Chair, I'll ask Councillor Lloyd Selby to join us.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair.
Oh, thank you very much. As I said before, There is nothing in these reports that we didn't see at Christmas that I can see. So if we could move on, Gemma, to
Yeah.
number 6. Thank you.
Yes, of course, you share now. Thank you. Okay, so just moving on to the capital proposals. Now we've had the provisional settlement, the funding is exactly where we thought it was going to be. So no real changes in terms of the amount of funding available. As previously referenced, there is £20 million available for decarbonisation across Wales, but we're not yet clear on what the basis will be allocated. And we've made some assumptions around the general capital funding level remaining the same for 24-25. In terms of the total value of capital schemes, across the 5 years, it's 265 million. It's summarised within the report, and it includes obviously significant sums for Band B and the Housing Improvement Programme. And the funding is set out in the report, and we draw funding in from a broad range of sources, including unsupported borrowing for HRA as part of the housing revenue account, and also some unsupported borrowing for the general fund, but that's largely around sustainable communities for learning schemes. In terms of the capital programme, new schemes that have been included following the provisional settlement and following review by Scrutiny and the budget working group. Specific to this committee are some additional funding for social services investor save schemes, and that 250,000 is a 23-24 figure. It's part of a larger programme of investment within the service that spans 3 years. And 230,000 has been identified for drainage repairs and underpinning works to Cartreth Porthkerry. We've also built in a scheme on a second social services property for 24-25. And there is £5,000 included for decarbonisation schemes, and that's still in the process of being allocated out across the council's assets. In terms of next steps and timetable, it's very similar to the revenue report. So this report's coming to you for scrutiny. It's out for public consultation with a view to taking final proposals to Cabinet on the 27th and setting the final budget by the 6th of March. Happy to take any questions on that report.
Anybody? I can see no hands on that. Nope. Okay. Sue.
Apologies, Chair, for raising my hand a little bit late. Again, not a question, just to thank you, Gemma, for that very helpful summary. And again, I think a comment that despite the pressures, it's very welcome that this budget sets out proposals to invest in community-based specialist accommodation. Because this is a budget report, it's framed as investing to save. But again, this committee all year has heard about some of the pressures that social services are facing, particularly in terms of at times having to accommodate children and young people out of area because of the difficulty of delivering more locally based services. So again, I would say this is a very welcome proposal. It's good news that we're talking about investing in specialist community-based services. This authority always puts the needs of children and vulnerable adults first. These proposals are not about simply saving money. They're about making sure that we put those needs first. So again, I would say my view would be that I recommend that we note the report, but also we welcome the proposals which will help us prioritise the needs of some of our most vulnerable citizens.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I would second that. I would say that as a council and as a committee, we're trying to give the best protection to our people that we can in the Vale of Glamorgan, considering, again, the constrictions that are on us as a council and as a committee. So well done again. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Gemma. It was a very helpful report, the way you've presented it. The recommendations are that we note the reference. Are there any recommendations you want to pass on to corporate resources?
Other than I've noted the comment from Councillor Lloyd Selby, seconded by Councillor Payne, Chair.
Yeah, other than that. Everybody happy? Can I have a proposer and a seconder then, please?
You've got that already, Chair, from Councillor Lloyd Selby and Councillor Payne.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. In that case, Gemma, once more, thank you for all your hard work and commitment on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Which moves us on to agenda item 7, the revenue monitoring for the period the 1st of April to the 30th of November 2022. This is for noting and any recommendations that anybody might want to put to it. Anybody? No.
I think it's back to Gemma. I believe Gemma's presentation continues on this one, Chair.
Thank you, Gemma.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the revenue monitoring, this report sets out the revised budget for 22-23, but the changes are very small. They largely reflect some transfers for insurance and ICT licenses and some environments within policy and corporate resources in place. Whilst the pay award, the additional pay award, has continued to cause some overspends in some areas, those have largely been offset by vacancies within service areas, but where they haven't been, they're offset by a policy underspend. In terms of the social services outturn, there is a specific accounting change that isn't a change to the social services a collection of income or their approach to income in any way. It's more a change to the point in which, as accountants, we recognise that income. So following the annual review of the 21-22 accounts by Audit Wales, they've identified that for an element of social care deferred income, whilst we recognise it in the accounts as a debtor, as many owe to the council, we offset it in full as a provision for doubtful debts. So in reality, we don't recognise it in our bottom line until the point that the debt crystallises. So a lot of this debt is linked to legal charges on properties, for instance. So at the point when that property is being sold and it's deemed that that debt is collectible, that is the point that we would recognise it in the accounts based on our historic approach. Under the recommendation of Audit Wales, we will now be moving to an approach where we recognise that debt as it's incurred, but based on a historic analysis of where we have failed to collect that debt in the past. So we will calculate a provision for bad debts, but that's likely to be far lower. It's in the region of about 18%, and therefore as a result, in order to make a one-off adjustment in the accounts to correct the accounting approach, it's likely that we will have £2 million of additional income in the 22-23 accounts. So hopefully that's clear, but just to emphasize that this isn't a change to the way that we're collecting income in the council or a change to social services policy. It's purely an accounting change, and it just means that we'll be in future recognizing income earlier, and because that's a move away from our current approach, there'll be a one-off impact in 22-23. That impact is offsetting overspends within the service area. So it's offsetting the cost of the additional pay award and overspends in resource management and in children and young people's services. It's also distorting the position slightly in terms of the outturn of adult services. And I think for the next monitoring, it might be more useful if I show that on a separate line, so it's clear that that's a one-off adjustment to the accounts. Following taking account of that adjustment, is expected there'll be a transfer into reserves of 1.3 million. And in previous years, we have tended to have some additional grant allocated to the service in the last quarter of the financial year. And whilst I'm not aware of any specific sums at the moment, obviously, if there is anything that occurs, that would increase that sum. Within leisure services, there is an adverse variance that we've reported throughout the year of approximately 500,000. And that's being incurred due to additional payments that were made to Parkwood that ceased as at the 31st of December 2022 whilst they recovered from COVID. And that element will be funded from the Neighbourhood Services Reserve. The monitoring report also includes detail on the council's borrowing and investments. So we are benefiting from some additional investment income in year. And then in terms of reserves, the report sets out the planned use of reserves, and you'll see a significant planned use of reserves for capital of around 25 million. But there is also some additional planned use of reserves for the social services budget programme, which was set out as part of the 22-23 budget, and sustainable communities for learning schemes. And we've also got some unplanned use of reserves as set out in the report for the Oracle implementation, additional costs associated with HGV drivers, that Parkwood contribution that I picked up, and also some additional costs of the pay award in building services. Happy to take any questions on that report.
Does anybody have any questions? The recommendations are: 1, that the position with regard to the authority's 22-23 revenue budget is noted. Sorry, Councillor Helen Payne.
Hi, Jem. I was just wondering, in terms of the impact of Project Zero, you're looking at HGVs, one of the last points. Will that have a positive impact also on the budget long term?
So the apologies. So in terms of the HGV drivers, this is where we're encountering additional pay costs due to the shortage of HGV drivers available to drive, for instance, our waste vehicles. So we're having to pay some additional sums to those drivers. So there's no relationship in terms of the a Project Zero there, unfortunately.
Yet,
yeah.
Councillor Neil Thomas.
Yeah, just again to say thank you, Gemma. I mean, it's been very much the Gemma Jones show this afternoon, and the work that she's done and her team have done behind all this to put all this together in such an understandable way. I'm forever grateful. Finance not being one of my favourite subjects, but certainly she's made it clear and done it well. Thank you very much, and I commend your reports. Thank you.
Yeah, Helen, did you want to come back in? Okay, thank you.
it's a legacy hand.
Yeah, once more, 3 recommendations for agenda item 7, that the position with regard to the authority's 22-23 revenue budget is noted. Agenda item 2, that members note the arrangements to offset the projected overspends in 22-23 as set out in the report. And 3, the members approve the amended revenue budget for 22-23 as set out in Appendix 1. Can I have somebody propose?
Move the recommendations. I move it.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I can second.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 8, the capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to the 30th of November 2022. Gemma, show once more.
Thank you very much. Okay. So in terms of the capital monitoring, we've got a revised programme of just over 88 million, and obviously a significant proportion of that is the housing improvement programme and sustainable communities for learning. We are getting to the part of the year where we do see some movement in terms of carry forward, although relatively low within this report. So we've got a carry forward for the Knapskate Park scheme, but I believe that's so it can utilise some additional funding and be delivered in next financial year. In terms of some additions and increases, we've got a few small environments within leisure schemes, so some compliance issues and community centre schemes, and some changes in the movements into the contingency budget for leisure centres as part of that ongoing scheme of leisure works. And that we just have tried to highlight in the report, although unfortunately nothing specific to this committee, but just where some progress is being made within the capital programme. So just some, significant schemes that have been progressed during the financial year. And those are the main points to pull out from the capital monitor report. So happy to take any questions on that report.
Does anybody have any questions? Going once? Yes, Neil.
Yeah, just again, and there's very little in this section of the report that actually impacts directly on us as a scrutiny committee. As Gemma pointed out at the end there, it's mostly in other directorates that this area comes. But again, it's clear, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? There are 4 recommendations on this report. One is that the progress made on delivering the 22-23 capital programme within the remit of the committee be noted. 2, that the use of delegated authority within the remit of the committee as set out in the report be noted. 3, that the use of emergency powers within the remit of the committee as detailed in the attached Appendix 1 to the report be noted. And 4, that the changes to the 22-23 and future years capital programme within the remit of the committee as set out in the report be noted. Are we all happy to note and move on?
Yeah.
Those 4 recommendations. Thank you. And second. Helen, you seconding? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, which takes us on to agenda item 9, which is the report of the Chief Executive. This is our report, really. It's the 3rd quarter scrutiny recommendation, tracking and updated work, programme schedule 22-23. I could see no slippage. I was pleased with it. Everything seems to be on course. I don't see any major points. This is a normal 3rd quarter report. And Amy is asking for our permission to publish. So can I have?
Move recommendations.
Thank you.
Yeah, the report's fine.
Councillor Lloyd-Selby.
Sorry, just one query, if I may. So in relation to the report, I think the very end of the report, pages 27 and 28, make reference to a number of reports that would previously have come before this committee, but were delayed understandably because of COVID. So I think there are some reports there that hadn't come to the committee since 2019 and are due to come in at some point in 2022-23. Now, I absolutely appreciate that times continue to be challenging for services, but am I right in thinking that those reports are outstanding? Have I read that correctly and will come at some point? And if so, I think I'm not expecting an answer now, but it will be helpful perhaps at a future committee meeting if there's any clarity around when those reports are likely to receive. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
I'm sure that's possible, Amy. Can we bring that to the next committee?
If I may, Chair, the content that's, just to clarify in direct response to Councillor Lloyd-Selby's question, the content that you've got on pages 27 and 28, 2 of those items are related to reports. So you have one on the development of the Vale Alliance, which the stage 1 report was received by the committee back on the 8th of March, and it was agreed at that time that a further report would come to the committee at the appropriate point. So we're waiting for notification from officers in relation to that one when that's ready to come back. And then the second report is a social services report on the carers strategy. And Lance kindly requested that we put this onto the forward work programme pending completion of the regional strategy in partnership with Cardiff Council. So they're the only 2 reports that you have listed. The other items in that section are related to presentations from the University Health Board, and also the Cogan Wellbeing Hub annual update, which was on our forward work programme as a presentation. The reason I haven't chased a presentation on that matter is, as you'll recall, at the last committee, we had a note from Dave Nevitt to say that a report was pending going to Cabinet shortly in relation to the Cogan Wellbeing Hub, and therefore we're more likely to get a more comprehensive information in relation to that. So that's coming, but I haven't had confirmation of exactly when that will be received in terms of the timetable. And then the other presentations from the University Health Board, I do keep in contact with the individuals that are listed in that section. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, since we've had the national pandemic, it's been increasingly difficult to get those colleagues to be able to commit their time to us. So I haven't removed them altogether, with your permission, because obviously we may still be able to have them in the future. But at the moment, I haven't been able to table anything for you, I'm afraid. So just to summarise, that the content on pages 27 and 28 is actually only 2 reports pending for yourself, and then the rest are PowerPoint presentations. I'm not sure if that helps, Councillor Loyce-Selby, but
thank you.
It does, thank you. It looked like there was some really interesting, helpful information that I'm sure would interest the committee. So absolutely appreciating the pressures those services are under, and very helpful that it's still there for reporting purposes. And if we get to the point where we're able to receive presentations again in the future, I would welcome that.
Yeah, we'll bring them as soon as we can. Lance.
Just going to say that carers one, I think, is a bit of a repeat, because it's on, there was an annual report that came on the March 22 that's due back again, I think, in March 23. So that line that in terms of the carer strategy, I think we've already picked that up within that other part member we had. We opted not to go for strategies, but to go for charters for unpaid carers. So I think time has probably evolved that action on, so we can probably remove that line on page 27.
Thank you, Lance. I mean, the reason for the recommendation is to maintain effective tracking of the committee's recommendations. So that's good, which takes us to the recommendations 1 and 2. 1, that the status of the actions listed in Appendix A and B to the report be agreed. And 2, that the updated forward work programme schedule 22-23 attached at Appendix C be approved and then uploaded to the council's website. So are we all okay with that? You're happy with that? Thank you, Neil, moving it.
Move.
Thank you. Second from Councillor Selby. Well, you'll be pleased to know that I don't have any other information or questions or agenda items. So thank you all once more for your attendance. Thank you, Gemma, for the way you presented the report. It was very, very good and very useful. Thank you, Neil, for always supporting me, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And if you are travelling, be safe. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.